and I was waiting behind Frances McDormand. I was just holding the Oscar like I'd been told that it's bad luck to put it down. So I
Oh,
was just
right.
standing there, kind of staring into the middle distance, holding him. And she turned around and she said, "Do you want my advice?" And I said, "Yes, please, please." And she said, "Ken doll clothes fit him exactly."
The 2024 Oscars race is in full swing, and we are chatting with the actors, creators, and more right here on The Awardist. Hello, I'm Gerrad Hall, Entertainment Weekly Executive Editor. 3 years ago, Emerald Fennell won the Best Original Screenplay Oscar for Promising Young Woman, which also scored her a Best Director nomination. Her second feature, Saltburn, is in theaters now, and it is creating quite a stir with audiences. In the movie, Barry Keoghan's Oliver befriends the popular Felix, played by Jacob Elordi, while they're at Oxford, and he scores an invite to Felix's family estate, the titular Saltburn, for the summer. Once there, Oliver is transported into a different world, but all is not as it seems. Emerald Fennell is our guest on this week's Awardist, and here now is my interview with her. Emerald Fennell, thank you so much for being on the Awardist podcast. I'm absolutely over the moon thrilled to have you here because I love Saltburn so much I can't even tell you. It's such a trip. I did not. I gotta say, I think the marketing at the point where I had seen it, it was so smart. And by the way, one of our writers had even seen it at Telluride, and I edited her review of it. And she wrote around certain things so well that I still had no idea what was coming. And I think that's the beauty of this movie, is the way like the layers of the onion peel back. It's so fantastic. So I'm going to say that I fully expect and hope that we will see you at the 2024 Oscars. But I want to go back 3 years to the 2021 Oscars, where you won Best Original Screenplay for Promising Young Woman. You were also nominated for directing. What do you remember about that night, aside from it being weird because it was a pandemic Oscars?
It was so extraordinary because, you just don't, when we made Promising Young Woman, obviously, we could never have anticipated the response to be what it was. And I was also just so excited for like Fred, who's the amazing editor who was nominated too. It was just, there was something so gratifying about it because everyone had worked so hard, and I just really felt, and they'd all like believed in me. And I was just like a random British woman, heavily pregnant,
Yes.
and they would all come and like trusted me and made the movie. So I just felt so thrilled for everyone that we were there. But I mean, it was so, I kind of, it's almost like a blackout, just because I was so terrified. I was so excited, but also so terrified. And also what I didn't realize until we sat down, so they'd sent a really beautiful kind of email beforehand saying, we don't, because it's a non-traditional year because of the pandemic, it's going to be very intimate. And so we don't want people to do acceptance speeches in the old fashioned sense. We want them to just like tell a story for 2 minutes. And of course, I immediately read that and was like, I do not know how to do that, what kind of a story.
Right.
And then I just thought, well, that'll be okay, because I'll get the sense from other people, if I have to think of something, at least I can see on the day what everyone else says, and sort of that'll be fine. And then I sat down, and the first award being read was Best Original Screenplay.
Yep.
And so I didn't know.
Right out the gate. Oh, no.
And then even more unfathomably, I won it. And I just couldn't believe, couldn't believe what was happening. And I was so shell-shocked and so terrified that I would cry, but cry in a way that was like undignified, that I was sort of, I don't remember the speech at all. I just remember being like, kind of in a sort of blackout of terror and joy, and I've not ever looked back at it because I don't know, it just seems too unreal. And my husband was waiting backstage for me, and there was nobody else because of COVID. It was literally just him backstage, and I was just holding it, and I came back, and again I was pregnant again. And we just like stared. I was just holding it, and we were just staring at each other, what do
What
you?
just happened? Yeah.
And then the best thing that happened, I was waiting in line for the porta potty. I think that's what you call them here. We call them portaloos in England, because it was that kind of a
Great.
situation that year. And it actually really, again, I really loved it. It felt very like fun. And I was waiting behind Frances McDormand, and I was just holding the Oscar, like I'd been told that it's bad luck to put it down. So I
Oh,
was just
right, right.
standing there, kind of staring into the middle distance, holding him. And she turned around and she said, do you want my advice? And I said, yes, please,
Uh,
please. And
of course.
she said, Ken doll clothes fit him exactly. And I was like, well, you're the best person I've ever met. I love you. And it really just kind of calmed me down. And
That is so funny.
I know, it's the coolest, right? And so,
Uh,
I mean, what a ride.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into Saltburn then. And I certainly hope you're able to give another speech for this movie. But and you'll be able to pass on that wisdom to perhaps another winner next year. But in terms of Saltburn, where did the story start? Like, what was that first little nugget from which you developed this wonderfully twisted tale?
It was about 8 years ago, and it was Oliver. And what happens is usually people kind of appear, or images appear, like imaginary friends suddenly. Um, and it was Oliver, and he was saying the first line in the movie, which is, I wasn't in love with him. And then I had, you know, and then there was the image of that same person licking the bottom of a bathtub. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting, because the first thing this person is saying is a lie,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
so that's always a great place to start. And so, bit by bit, things happen and then they coalesce, and over the years, it starts to become more fixed.
Yeah. So once things were coalescing, ultimately, where did you find like why was this a story you wanted to tell? Like what was kind of simmering in you that needed to get out, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really funny. You often don't know, right? It's like a dream sometimes. It's not like, I mean, certainly I I am compelled to write things because they interest me, or they concern me, or I need to work something out myself, or try to at least. And so often you don't necessarily know thematically why. Maybe sometimes until afterwards, like during these conversations, when you realize, what where it comes from. But I think for me, I wanted to write something. I love to play with genre, and so I wanted to look at that. Something happens in a country house one summer genre, established by sort of Brideshead Revisited and the Go Between, and I suppose I was the reason for that is it seems to me to be the place where kind of sex and class and longing all collide.
Mhm.
And but I think more specifically, it was about that feeling that I think all of us have at the moment, which is of a kind of a bottomless pit of want and jealousy and need, and voyeurism
Mhm.
that has been enabled really by our sort of social media. And it sounds very kind of trite, but the thing of like looking at people all the time, looking at food, looking at houses, looking at workout regimes, and our relationship with those things, that is both, we understand that these things, they can't even look back at us, let alone acknowledge us. And it seemed to me to be kind of a funny sort of version of this sadomasochistic relationship that we in Britain have with the aristocracy and with country houses. And it's this sort of, you see it on the internet, you see it, with all the time, everywhere you go, that you look at something, you can't stop looking at it, you're obsessed with it, it makes you feel bad, And then the way that you feel bad is then projected back onto that thing that you love or find
Mm.
sexy or find appealing. And so it's this kind of cycle which is sort of slowly driving us all completely mad. But also, it is a satire, and it
Mm-hmm.
does, I think, the limits of the genre, if there are limits, I think it's one of my favorite genres, and it is about yearning. It's about yearning, and it's about completely it's about restraint. Look at The Remains of the Day, even, or Atonement. It's about restraint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see what happens when you take off those restraints to this genre. And also, in the same way that Promising Young Woman dealt with similar things, how do you actually break these systems?
Mm.
What do you do? How do you do it? And actually, with Promising Young Woman, the truth of it is that it isn't violent. It can't be violence because women can't win that physical battle. But when it comes to class and wealth, how do these people get these houses in the first place?
Mm. Right. Right.
So it felt like this kind of, it's not just about, it's about how we get what we want, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that is. And then how, empty the getting is, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only way of getting it requires, all sorts of terrible things.
Perhaps some sinister deeds along the way. Yeah,
Maybe,
yeah,
maybe.
to get that. Yeah, for our when we featured this movie in our fall movie preview, you spoke to our writer Lauren Huff about various inspirations. You just mentioned some of them: Brideshead Revisited, Atonement, even Dracula, Paradise, The Handmaiden. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, these are all movies that like you had seen and that had made a long term impression on you, or did you also like dig more into the genre to look at other films as you were prepping things?
Oh, of course. I don't think I hope that I'd be able to write a, fairly decent thesis on on the genre. There's,
Mhm.
of course, there's Peter Green, there's all of Peter Greenaway, there's almost all of Merchant Ivory, particularly their early
Mhm.
work. E.M. Forster from a kind of literary standpoint, Pete, Pete Hollinghurst, Line of Beauty. Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. Look, there's so much stuff. There's so much stuff. Teorama, all of that stuff. But the thing is that if you're making films, I guess I can't. Certainly for me, I can't pretend a film doesn't exist in the world of films. It's why there are often films in my films. There's Night of the Hunter in Promising a Woman, and in this movie, it's The Ring and
Yeah.
Superbad. Like,
Mhm.
it's important to me. If you're making movies, every single thing on screen, your audience is they are bringing their own library, whether it's a DVD library or a book library or their own personal experience or their relationship with the actors you're choosing. And so to not acknowledge, to try and suspend disbelief to the point where you're all saying, let's pretend these things don't exist, that they exist in a
Mhm.
vacuum.
Right.
For me, it's really important to say, like, if I'm working with a genre and a very specific subgenre, say, like this gothic country house genre, you can't possibly not acknowledge, and indeed that genre itself is referential. So what you see is that, Jude the Obscure has so many echoes in Brideshead. They're almost
Mhm.
the same like metaphors used, the
Mhm.
wall and the door within the door and all of these sorts of things. And then,
Yeah.
you have the go between, and they are all taking that genre. And something like Atonement and The Remains of the Day, all of them have that the same kind of gothic structure, and they all kind of acknowledge each other, and they kind of hold hands. So I do think it's important to me that you don't want to make something derivative. It's not about something being derivative, but it's kind of like, it's also acknowledging that your work can only really exist because you and the audience know of other things. And I
Mhm.
do have a fixation on T.S. Eliot because I'm just massive basic nerd. But, you know, his whole thing was about taking familiar things, whether it's like, you know, kind of parts of the Bible or other poems, or, you know, just drunk people spilling out of a pub, whatever it is. He takes things and reassembles something new. That's always going to be part, I think, of anything that I make, because that's how I live my life. You and me have references. When I say Paris Hilton to you, or when I say to a British person, a Crunchy Bar, or the Cheeky Girls, or Superbad, or any of these things, you know, we talk like this all the time. We live like this all the time. So I do feel it's important when you're kind of making things that those, I don't know, that feels like a part of it.
Let me ask you this. What did you learn? What did you take from directing Promising Young Woman that you applied on Saltburn? Or did you feel like you had largely the same approach?
I mean, again, it's so difficult to kind of to know yourself when you're in it. I certainly feel like I was Promising Young Woman was an interesting one because it was my first film, and so it's always a little bit more difficult to explain what you mean to people if you don't have another kind of reference point. So I think, and also because we had so little time and a very low budget, and I wanted to make it in this kind of quite stylized sort of sugarland world. Every day was a battle to get everything completed, because of course we were moving locations every day, we were losing time, and it would have been so easy to just sort of go handheld and just not dress rooms and not make sets and all that kind of stuff. But so what I mean is that I think I had to be, I was holding onto the reins incredibly tightly because I was concerned. And also I'd seen female filmmakers get undermined by their crew. That never happened to me, by the way, on that, or any of my films, I should say, but I'd seen it happen before as, you know, as an actress. I'd seen it time and time again. And so I was holding onto those reins very tightly. And I think probably, even though it was the right thing for the movie, I hope, because it meant that it could be singular, and it was a pain, but, you know, we did make it look the way we wanted it to look given our time constraints and our budget. But I think what I was able to do with Saltburn was I could let go of the reins a little bit, just to let everyone else do their work, you know, do the kind of brilliant work that you need. You know, you need to be constantly, in every department, including mine, pushing each other to be better, always, to do something interesting, to do something that might be a huge failure, but could also be transcendent. And I mean that on a day-to-day level. Like, you know, what are the details that make this strange? What is the consistency of the bathwater? What is the, you know, what is the kind of what kind of chocolate are they eating? What all of it, you know, is crucial. But you need to be able to be collaborative in order to let people push you too.
Does that mean that wasn't just regular water in the tub? Like, did you have to use something different?
No, we used water.
Okay.
I mean, we used water, but we used other things too.
Got it. Okay, I see. Okay, you mentioned that Oliver was kind of the first character, the first person who appeared to you here. At what point did Barry Keoghan, no pun intended, reveal himself to you as who your Oliver would be?
Actually, he wasn't in my mind as I wrote it at all. And in many ways, it would have been a more kind of true, perhaps, to the genre, and to that kind of doppelganger theme, to have found two actors who kind of looked very similar, whatever. But I felt from very early on that we needed somebody who was a kind of stealth agent, you know? And Barry has this extraordinary thing. I mean, I could talk about what and why he's so brilliant for forever, but his vulnerability is like nothing else. You know, so when you talk about like Banshees, it's just like one of the most heartbreaking performances anyone's ever done. But he also has this dark charisma and this like insane sex appeal that meant you could see him in this family of kind of towering, beautiful aristocrats. You could see him kind of getting in through those cracks. And I just think he's the most beguiling, fascinating performer. And he's, and I like to do really, really, really super, super close-ups. And the thing with Barry is that the closer you get, the less you know, the more beguiling, the more fascinating. He's just, and so I met him, I loved him. He's like me, he just wants to get into it. Got no interest in like small talk, we just want to get into it. And we, and again, it was we were pushing each other a lot, both of us, all the time, like pushing out of, just it was a really wonderful experience, because we both kind of wanted the same thing, which was to make something that made people feel like, got people's blood up, made people want to leave and kind of commit some kind of act of some kind, to make people feel, to not enjoy something from afar, kind of passively, but to feel something. And that's really hard. It's really hard when we are all so used to seeing so much all the time. And so Barry really, he's so the things that other people would find very difficult, he doesn't find difficult at all.
Okay, so that's what I was going to say. Did certain scenes take much convincing? But it sounds like no.
And I would never convince. Also, that sounds very kind of prissy, but it's really important to sort of to always kind of say that, like, part of being able to make things like this is to have a huge amount of trust between yourselves, all of the actors, and an amazing intimacy coordinator who we did have, Miriam. But that I would never ever coerce someone into doing something. Course, I would never try and persuade them. But again, I'm not saying that just to be kind of trite, but I'm saying it because you can only make something like this with trust. People have to.
They've already got to be willing to go there.
Totally. And it has to be mutual, and it has to be both of you kind of tumbling off a cliff together, and with the kind of very sincere belief that you could, like, smash on the rocks as well as dive in. Like, it's got to feel like that all the time. That's, and then that's what the audience feels too. Because I truly think something can only feel visceral if you understand that everyone is all in. It's not kind of an art form. It's not some choreographed thing. It's properly getting to the center of something, or trying to.
Right. I want to talk to you about the rest of the cast, but to the point of what you're saying, and I'm pretty sure you have seen the film with audiences, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are I would say 4 or 5 scenes that elicit a certain kind of reaction. At first, perhaps it's a bit of shock at what they're witnessing, but then, this is what I've loved the 2 times I've seen the movie, then watching at first the shock settle in when there's the realization of the purpose of those scenes and what the deeper, darker underlying meaning is. Having said all of that, is there one in particular, a scene, a moment that you were worried about how it would land?
Without being facetious, I was never worried. I was only worried that there are certain scenes that I needed to make sure that I did all the work, and me and Victoria did all the work in the edit, so that we knew that the audience would get to the stage where they understood why it was. And also, I'm interested in the thing that I kind of use as an example, which, and you kind of get a good idea of whether maybe you're going to enjoy this movie or not, is like the pleasure disgust of popping as it. That kind of squeamish sensuality that you get. And so what this film is always kind of asking and looking at is like, what do we want and how are we going to get it? What is it really like to feel completely taken, drilled down into total psychotic desire and want to be consumed entirely by that. In order to do that, you can't like pussyfoot around it. And I think also what I'm always keen to remind people is that if, hopefully people who are listening to this, because spoilers, have seen the movie, but the nudity in this film, of which there is a lot, is never ever about sex. It's about grief or despair or horror or shame, or it's about triumph. And it's an act of desecration, joyful or otherwise. And the sex scenes in this movie, of which there are also many, are rarely below the shoulder blades and contain no nudity at all.
Yeah.
And they
very true.
are unbearably sexy. But the audience is doing all of the work. I mean, it's not an NC-17 movie, it's an R-rated movie.
Right.
And people can't believe that. But actually, when you break it down to the sum of its parts, what you realize is that nobody's doing anything. What you're seeing hits so deeply, but really it's just a person in a room on their own drinking something.
Right.
It's not, we're not seeing people go at it,
right.
naked. And as a woman who's grown up watching women's bodies be kind of continuously, relentlessly exposed and sort of treated poorly on film, it's interesting that these are the things that we find shocking.
No, I totally hear you. And that's, I mean, I will admit it first. I think the shock for me was just the fact that I was seeing something that I'd never seen before in film.
Oh, totally. No.
Yeah. So to that point, no, that's where I just think it's so wonderful that you did that. Because to your point, we see all kinds of body horrors, objectification, all of that, in the history of cinema. But there are scenes in this that I've never seen before. And I applaud you so much for that.
Thank you. And also, I just think so much of it is a bit what I kind of always like to think, and what the cast and the crew and everyone, in just conceiving of and making this film, there is a kind of honesty. Because it doesn't come from nowhere, these things don't come from nowhere. They exist in one's mind. So therefore, what I hope it's able to do is say, is give people permission to feel, or to question if they feel disgusted, to question why, if they feel turned on, to be interested in that, if they to just understand that you can respond, that you have permission to laugh. You have permission to be horrified. You have permission to be aroused. That all of these things can happen all in the same moment. That's what it's all about for me, and it's why I'm so hopeful that people will go and see it in the movie theaters, because it's just a different experience when you've got somebody sitting next to you. It's so different.
I could not agree more with that. See it in theaters. Lastly, here I've got to give a shout out to the rest of this incredible cast: Jacob Elordi, Rosamund Pike, Richard E. Grant, Allison Oliver, who I have to admit I was not familiar with, and she's just fantastic. I hope I say his last name correctly. Archie Madekwe.
Archie Madekwe, yeah.
Madekwe, and then of course Carey Mulligan, who just absolutely kills it in the few scenes that she is in. This cast, I mean, you found the pot of gold. You hit the jackpot. You won the lottery with these folks.
The thing is that they're all sublime. They're all sublime. They're all funny. It's always got to be funny. At the end of the day, it's only possible because the film is a comedy, really. And they're just, all of them, completely... I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it when we got in the room to rehearse, everyone together. Just like the charisma, the chemistry, the kind of electrical, the electrical pulses coming off of these people is so exciting, and they're lovely. And again, they are, all they want to do is make things.
Yeah, I think those electrical pulses, you can see it on screen. It seems like you have a cast who is really excited to tell a different, unique, compelling story. So Kudos to everyone involved, truly. There are a lot of fantastic movies this year, I will say. Yours is at the top of the list for me. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Thank
bravo,
you.
congrats. Yeah,
Thank
of
you
course,
so
of course. I'm shouting it from the rooftops. Folks, go see Saltburn.
Yay.
So, yeah, well, our time is up, but I thank you very much for spending a bit of your day with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for asking so
of
many
course.
thoughtful questions and for loving the film.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.
Well, of course, we covered a lot of ground right there, but we have so much more on Saltburn at EW.com. Our Lauren Huff dug in deep with Emerald Fennell, as well as star Barry Keoghan, about what's being called the bathtub scene, the vampire scene, and the grave scene, as well as that dementedly joyful final scene of the film. Saltburn is playing in theaters right now. All right, folks, that is it for this episode of The Awardist. If you like what you're hearing here, you can follow, rate the podcast, and leave us an award-winning review on Apple Podcasts. And to keep the conversation with us going, follow Entertainment Weekly on all socials. You can find us at EW on X, formerly known as Twitter, and at Entertainment Weekly everywhere else. You can also tag me at Gerrad Hall. We will see you back here next week and every day at EW.com.